Tactical team, perimeter breach on Sector 4. Repeat, Sector 4 compromised. The frantic voice crackled through the earpiece, cutting through the pre-dawn quiet like a rogue lawnmower in a meditation retreat. My grip tightened on the lukewarm black coffee I'd been nursing since the apocalypse pager had shrieked me awake. Apocalypse, in this context, meant a significant chunk of the eastern seaboard was currently experiencing the digital equivalent of a prolonged existential crisis, all thanks to a severed fiber optic line at node 734. And the only thing standing between widespread panic and me was, well, that was still being determined. Thorn to Overwatch, confirm breach, I muttered, more to myself than the unseen voice in my ear. Outside my slightly too small apartment, the price you paid for living close enough to the city to be useful, but far enough to, usually, avoid the worst of the urban chaos, the sky was just starting to bleed from inky black to a bruised purple. Not a pretty sunrise, fittingly. Confirmed, Thorn. Civilian vehicle, dark SUV, no transponder. Occupants unknown. Proceed with extreme caution. Extreme caution. Right. That's what I'd been employing when I'd politely asked the self-appointed warden of this suburban hellscape for access to the legally mandated easement. My caution had been met with a laminated sign, a 3-ring binder thicker than a Tolstoy novel, and a pronouncement that my mere presence violated the sacred aesthetic covenants of Whispering Pines Estates. Overwatch, stand down on the extreme caution, I sighed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The breach is likely our friendly neighborhood HOA president, Brenda Miller, doubling down on her delusion of grandeur. I'm betting she's trying to reinforce her barricade of aggressively manicured flower pots. I tossed the dregs of my coffee into the sink, grabbed my go bag, a surprisingly heavy collection of diagnostic tools, emergency rations, mostly energy bars that tasted vaguely of regret, and the aforementioned apocalypse pager, and headed for the door. 3 hours ago, I'd been blissfully unaware that the fate of regional air traffic control might hinge on my ability to navigate Brenda's meticulously documented parking regulations. Now I was about to have a very unpleasant conversation, likely followed by the deployment of resources that would make your average suburbanite clutch their pearls and call their congressman. Again. The drive to Whispering Pines felt longer than it should have, the pre-dawn gloom mirroring the knot of irritation tightening in my stomach. Node 734 wasn't some fly-by-night operation. It was a critical nexus point, a digital cornerstone for everything from emergency services dispatch to the blinking lights that kept airplanes from becoming expensive lawn darts. And it had been offline for 36 hours, because Brenda apparently felt its existence clashed with her prize-winning petunias. I found Sal and his Tri-County Fiber crew exactly where I'd left them the previous evening, slumped against the side of their utility truck like deflated parade balloons. Empty coffee cups littered the asphalt like casualties of a caffeine war. Sal, a man whose face bore the permanent etchings of 1,000 frustrating jobs, straightened up slightly as my decidedly non-tactical sedan rolled to a stop. "Morning, Captain Chaos," he grumbled, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Any luck charming the... what did you call her? The suburban gatekeeper?" "Let's just say diplomacy failed spectacularly," I replied, popping the trunk and grabbing my go bag. "Which brings us to Plan B, or maybe it's C by now. Honestly, the alphabet's starting to blur." "Plan B involve actual tools?" one of Sal's guys, a skinny kid named Kevin, asked hopefully. "Eventually," I said. "First, it involves a slightly more assertive approach to property line enforcement." I pointed down the perfectly paved cul-de-sac to Brenda's house, The one with the flagpole that looked suspiciously close to violating some obscure ordinance about wind resistance coefficients. Even in the dim light, I could see the small orange traffic cone stubbornly blocking the narrow dirt track leading to the communications tower, a monument to Brenda's unwavering commitment to something. Petty tyranny, mostly. "See that cone?" I asked Sal. "That's the Maginot Line. We're about to politely but firmly roll right over it." Sal exchanged a bewildered glance with Kevin. "Politely?" "Relatively speaking," I clarified. I pulled out my phone, the screen displaying a contact labeled simply "Dispatch." Time to dial in a little corporate muscle. The phone rang twice before a calm, professional female voice answered. "Aperture Regional Dispatch. How may I assist?" "This is Alex Thorne, employee ID 77 Delta 9, I said, my voice crisp and official, a tone I rarely used outside of actual emergencies. "I am on site at node 734. I have a persistent obstruction of a critical infrastructure access point. The obstruction is civilian, non-violent, but actively preventing essential repairs." There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind that usually precedes the uttering of a sequence of highly specific protocols. "Understood, Mr. Thorne. You have previously attempted standard access procedures?" "Affirmative, multiple times." "The subject, one Brenda Miller, president of the Whispering Pines HOA, has cited local bylaws and aesthetic concerns to deny access despite federal easement documentation." Another, slightly longer pause. I could practically hear the gears turning at Dispatch HQ, the algorithms cross-referencing my employee file, the site status reports, and the surprisingly extensive legal documentation regarding Node 734's protected status. "Mr. Thorne," the voice finally said, a subtle shift in tone that hinted at the gravity of the situation. "Are you requesting activation of enhanced access protocols?" I looked down the pristine street at the innocent-looking cone, at Brenda's house, which, I was willing to bet, had security cameras trained on our every move. I thought about the red alerts still flashing on my secure terminal, the potential ramifications of a prolonged outage. "Dispatch," I said, my decision firm. "Execute Protocol 3B. I require immediate establishment of a secure perimeter encompassing the full legal easement of Node 734. Standard non-lethal deployment. My authority is Director Evans, pre-approved." The response was immediate and devoid of emotion. "Acknowledged, Mr. Thorne. Team is mobile. Estimated time of arrival, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That wasn't a leisurely Sunday stroll down a tree-lined lane. That was a promise of swift, decisive action. I hung up, a strange mix of relief and a sliver of apprehension settling in. This was going to be interesting. Sal and Kevin were staring at me, their expressions a blend of curiosity and dawning realization. "Enhanced access protocols?" Sal repeated slowly. "What in the Sam Hill does that involve?" I just gave him a tight smile. "You're about to find out, my friend. You're about to find out." I leaned against my car, watching the eastern sky lighten. 3 minutes. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. I could almost feel Brenda stirring in her fortress of floral arrangements, unaware of the subtle shift in the suburban balance of power that was about to occur. 2 minutes and 45 seconds later, they arrived. Not with sirens blaring or tires screeching, but with an almost unnerving silence. 2 identical black, unmarked SUVs glided into the cul-de-sac, their movements precise and coordinated. 8 figures in dark gray tactical gear emerged, each moving with an economy of motion that spoke of rigorous training. They were led by a man with a shaved head and an air of quiet authority. Marcus, the head of Aperture Dynamics' Regional Tactical Response Team. Marcus nodded curtly in my direction. "Mr. Thorne." "Marcus," I replied, a strange sense of calm washing over me as the professionals took over. "Glad you could make it." Without a word, Marcus gestured, and his team sprang into action. 2 members deployed lightweight but robust barricades at either end of the cul-de-sac, effectively sealing it off to non-authorized vehicles. Others began unspooling a high-visibility, temporary fence line, meticulously following what I knew were GPS coordinates defining the exact boundaries of the Node 734 easement. That easement, conveniently, sliced directly across a corner of Brenda's meticulously landscaped front yard, encompassing a significant portion of her Petunia population. Another team member deployed a series of small, almost inconspicuous sensor units along the fence line. Marcus himself walked directly to the orange cone, picked it up without a flicker of emotion, and deposited it neatly on Brenda's porch. Brenda, as if summoned by the disturbance, appeared on her front porch, clutching her phone, her mouth agape. The triumphant smirk I'd last seen plastered across her face had been replaced by an expression of utter disbelief. Sal and Kevin watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and amusement. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice low and professional, cutting through the stunned silence. "Perimeter established. Sector 4 is secure. Awaiting your instructions." I looked at Brenda, still frozen on her porch, then back at Marcus and his team. "All right, Marcus," I said, a small, undeniably smug smile creeping onto my face. "Let's go fix the internet." The next few hours were a surreal blend of high-stakes technical work and low-stakes suburban drama. With the perimeter secured by Marcus's unflappable team, Sal and his crew finally had unimpeded access to the tower. The temporary fence, while not exactly aesthetically pleasing, was undeniably effective at keeping Brenda and her increasingly agitated neighbors at bay. The technical issue itself, once we were able to get into the Node 734 control unit, was exactly what I'd suspected. A squirrel, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that a crucial power conduit looked like a particularly tasty nut. The resulting electrical surge had fried a key interface card, taking the entire node offline. It was a frustratingly mundane cause for such a widespread crisis. While Sal and Kevin worked on replacing the damaged components, I monitored the network status from my ruggedized laptop, the green lights slowly starting to flicker back to life across the digital map. The rhythmic beeping of diagnostic tools became the soundtrack to the unfolding suburban siege. Brenda, however, was far from defeated. Her initial shock had morphed into a simmering rage, which manifested in a series of increasingly desperate and frankly bizarre attempts to disrupt our work. First came the sprinklers. As Kevin was carefully running new fiber cable from the truck to the tower, a geyser of water erupted from Brenda's lawn, drenching him from head to toe. One of Marcus's team members, without a word, calmly walked to the property line, produced a set of specialized tools, and shut off the water supply at the main valve. Brenda shrieked from her porch, but the water stopped as abruptly as it had started. Next was the music. Apparently, Brenda's preferred weapon of psychological warfare was the collected works of Barry Manilow, played at a volume that could probably crack glass. The saccharine melodies blared from speakers strategically placed in her windows. Marcus's team, however, seemed unfazed. They simply donned high-end noise-canceling headphones and continued their work with robotic efficiency. I found myself humming along to Copacabana despite myself, a testament to the sheer absurdity of the situation. The phone calls were relentless. Brenda could be seen pacing back and forth on her porch, her phone glued to her ear, her voice rising in pitch with each failed attempt to rally support. I imagined she was dialing everyone from the local news stations, who, judging by their lack of arrival, probably had better things to do, to the mayor's office, who likely recognized her number and immediately hit ignore. Sal, bless his cynical heart, was thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. "You know," he said, wiping a smudge of grime from his cheek, "I've worked in some pretty rough neighborhoods, but I gotta say, this takes the cake. Never thought I'd see a tactical security team deployed over a landscaping dispute." "It's not a landscaping dispute, Sal," I corrected him. "It's a critical infrastructure protection scenario involving an overly enthusiastic homeowner." Around mid-morning, the whispers started. Neighbors, drawn by the unusual activity and Brenda's increasingly frantic social media posts, began to emerge from their beige fortresses. They stood at a safe distance, peering at the fence line with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Some muttered amongst themselves, others discreetly filmed the scene with their phones. Then came the HOA War Council. A gaggle of equally self-important-looking individuals, beige shirt Ken, yoga pants Carol, and a woman with a disturbingly large collection of decorative garden gnomes gathered on Brenda's lawn just outside the perimeter. They huddled conspiratorially, pointing at the security team, occasionally casting venomous glances in my direction. "Looks like reinforcements have arrived," I said to Marcus, who was calmly monitoring the situation. "Affirmative, Mr. Thorne," he replied, his face betraying no emotion. "Hostile element appears to be engaged in strategic planning. We are observing their movements." Their strategic plan, as it turned out, was about as effective as Brenda's musical assault. They attempted a citizen's blockade, bravely placing lawn chairs at the edge of the security fence and sitting there, arms crossed, glaring with the intensity of 1,000 suns, albeit very suburban suns. One particularly bold member even set up a small portable grill and began cooking hot dogs, the aroma drifting faintly towards our work area. Marcus approached me, his report delivered with his usual deadpan precision. "Sir, the hostiles have deployed folding chairs and are attempting to establish a glare-based offensive. Additionally, they have initiated a cooked protein dispersal operation. Wind direction is favorable for our position, but the olfactory assault may impact morale." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Thanks for the intel, Marcus. Keep an eye on those hot dogs. If they start offering them, that could be a sign of escalating desperation, or a truly bizarre peace offering." The afternoon wore on, the technical work progressing steadily. Sal and Kevin were nearing completion, their movements now practiced and efficient. The green lights on my laptop screen were multiplying. The digital world, it seemed, was slowly breathing again. Meanwhile, the HOA War Council remained in their lawn chairs, their glare softening slightly with the passing hours. The hot dog chef had apparently run out of propane, the scent of grilling replaced by the more familiar aroma of freshly cut suburban grass. Brenda, however, remained a whirlwind of agitated energy, pacing her porch, occasionally shouting vague threats in our direction. Then came the Trojan barbecue. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns, Brenda and her council approached the security perimeter, each carrying a paper plate piled high with food. The ultimate weapon of suburban warfare, passive-aggressive hospitality. Brenda, adopting a sickly sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, addressed the nearest security guard, a young man who looked like he hadn't slept in days but still stood ramrod straight. "Hello there, young man," she chirped, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We know you're just doing your job. We thought you might be hungry. We brought you some refreshments." She held out a plate, laden with slightly charred burgers, and a generous scoop of what appeared to be suspiciously mayonnaise-heavy potato salad. The guard didn't flinch. He simply held up a hand, his expression polite but firm. He reached for a small device clipped to his vest, something that looked like a cross between a barcode scanner and a tricorder from Star Trek. He scanned the plate of potato salad. The device emitted a series of rapid beeps. "Checkpoint Alpha," the guard spoke into his wrist-mounted communicator, his voice calm and professional. "I have a potential uncontrolled biological agent at the perimeter. Offering consists of ground beef patties and a creamy potato-based substance. Advise on acceptance protocol." There was a brief pause. Then Marcus's voice crackled back, loud enough for all of us to hear. "Checkpoint Alpha, this is Overwatch. Decline the offering. Maintain biohazard protocols. Repeat, biohazard protocols are in effect." The guard gave Brenda a polite but utterly dismissive nod. "Thank you for your kind offer, ma'am, but we are unable to accept outside food or beverages at this time." He then turned his back and resumed his post. The expressions on Brenda's and her counsel's faces were priceless. Their carefully constructed peace offering, their attempt to undermine the unflappable professionalism of the security team with the irresistible allure of lukewarm barbecue, had been rejected. Classified as a potential biohazard, no less. The defeat was absolute, the humiliation profound. Not long after the great potato salad debacle, the technical work was finally complete. The last green light flickered to life on my screen. Node 734 was back online. The digital arteries of the eastern seaboard were flowing freely once more. My apocalypse pager gave a soft, almost apologetic chirp. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from Director Evans. Subject: Incident 734. Status: nominal. Excellent work, Thorne. Please submit a full incident report. Also expect a hazard pay bonus in your next remuneration cycle. Stand down and return to base. Hazard pay for dealing with Brenda Miller and her petunias. I almost laughed. As Sal and Kevin began packing their tools, a different kind of vehicle arrived in Whispering Pines. Not a stealthy black SUV, but a gleaming, impeccably polished town car that looked like it belonged to a CEO, or, more likely, a very expensive lawyer. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass stepped out. He carried a slim leather briefcase and an air of quiet authority that made even Marcus's team look slightly less intimidating. He walked directly towards Brenda, who was still standing on her lawn, staring blankly in the direction of the departed potato salad. "Mrs. Brenda Miller?" the lawyer asked, his voice calm and devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association?" Brenda, looking utterly deflated, managed a weak, "Yes?" "Excellent," the lawyer said, his gaze never wavering. "I am Mr. Covington, representing the legal department of Aperture Dynamics. On behalf of my client, you are hereby served." He produced a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and handed it to Brenda. Then, with the same unnerving politeness, he handed an identical stack to Beige Shirt Ken, who had wandered over looking confused. "These documents," Mr. Covington continued, "constitute a detailed invoice for costs incurred due to the unauthorized obstruction of a federally protected critical infrastructure access point, including but not limited to operational delays, deployment of a tactical response unit, administrative fees, and projected damages. Legal action is being initiated against the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association as a corporate entity, and against you, Mrs. Miller, in your capacity as the responsible officer." Brenda's eyes scanned the first page of the invoice, her already pale face drained of all color. I couldn't see the exact figure from where I was standing, but I had a pretty good idea of Aperture Dynamics' billing rates. It wouldn't be pretty. It would likely involve more zeros than Brenda had ever seen outside of a property valuation. Mr. Covington gave a curt nod, returned to his gleaming black car, and was driven away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The Suburban siege was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of legal documents and the dawning realization of financial ruin. Within minutes, Marcus and his team had vanished as silently and efficiently as they had arrived. The temporary fence was gone, the barricades removed, the only evidence of their presence a few faint tracks on Brenda's lawn, and the lingering scent of professionalism. As I walked towards my car, go bag slung over my shoulder, I saw Brenda still standing on her porch, the lawsuit clutched in her trembling hands. Her meticulously ordered world had been thoroughly and irrevocably disrupted. I paused by my car, rolled down the window, and looked at her. "Have a nice day, ma'am," I said, my voice deliberately casual. "Be sure to file all relevant documentation with your Architectural Review Committee." Then I started the engine and drove away, leaving Whispering Pines Estates and its bewildered residents in my rearview mirror. My final stop wasn't my apartment, but a dimly lit dive bar a few miles outside of Whispering Pines. The kind of place where the beer was cold, the music was classic rock, and no one cared if you'd just orchestrated the tactical deployment of a security team over a landscaping dispute. Sal was already there, nursing a pint of something dark and looking thoroughly amused. "I still can't believe it," he said, shaking his head and chuckling. "You called in the damn cavalry on a neighborhood busybody." I took a long sip of my own beer, the cold liquid a welcome contrast to the day's simmering frustration. "She started it, Sal, with a traffic cone. I just escalated things to the appropriate level." "Appropriate?" Sal snorted. "Kid, you nuked her flower beds from orbit." "It was a very targeted, legally sanctioned nuke," I corrected him. "And besides, I have a feeling Mr. Covington's paperwork did more damage than Marcus's guys ever could." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Evans. "Update? Whispering Pines. HOA is attempting to contest the invoice. Legal anticipates a swift and decisive victory. Your bonus has been expedited." I smiled, leaned back in the worn vinyl booth, and took another swallow of my beer. Some days you spend your time battling digital gremlins and faulty hardware. Other days you find yourself on the front lines of a suburban turf war, armed with nothing more than a federal easement and the unwavering support of a corporate legal department. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get to watch a self-proclaimed queen of cul-de-sac suddenly realize that her rulebook doesn't apply when you're the one keeping the world connected. And that, I decided, was a damn good reason to raise a glass.